Okay. Oh, that's sufficient. Good. So good afternoon, dear friends. As announced this morning, we'll continue with the discussion on agenda item 3, which is the UNEP in the context of the reform of the UN and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now, as I said to you, this was supposed to be interactive from the beginning. So you get a few questions and then you get a few answers, then you get some more questions. So now it's time for answers. And I'd very much want to give the floor to Tim Kasten, Director of Policy and of the Policy and Program Division, to respond to the questions so far. And then we will go back to the remaining speakers, who I will check here are Malawi, Morocco, United Kingdom, and the United Republic of Tanzania, and you can ask for the floor more. But remember, we have a juicy budget discussion to go through still this this sort of afternoon. So, Tim, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I hope everyone enjoyed a short break. And I'm happy to begin to answer the first set of questions, and thank you to all the distinguished representatives for the engagement thus far. First of all, let me start with the questions posed originally by the European Union regarding the engagement of the Environmental Management Group and how we are continuing to work with them in a strategic way for UN reform. First of all, we are making the Environment Management Group future ready in support of an inclusive and strengthened international environmental governance. Following the work that's already been done on biodiversity and the common approach, we've begun new work on a pollution stream. So that's adding a new element, as well as looking at the components of our common agenda that would focus on emerging trends such as a triple planetary crisis, macroeconomic uncertainty, technological innovation, and others that impact on the environmental governance arrangements. This is also going to allow the EMG, the Environment Management Group, to be better prepared and more proactively engaged for considerations of intergenerational equity, gender, and human rights. Secondly, on promoting partnerships to enhance the implementation of the environmental SDGs and the environmental dimensions of the SDGs, the EMG has been working to enhance UN system-wide networking and enabling enhanced participation by various stakeholders in multilateral environmental governance, policy setting, and implementation. This would enable the UN system to support the coherent, integrated, and effective management of the global environmental commons as a key element in the achievement of the SDGs. And finally, through enhancing UN leadership in sustainability management, the UN Sustainability Strategy outlines the vision of the UN system as being a leader in integrating environmental and social sustainability considerations across its work in a systematic and coherent way. The EMG continues to support the enhanced internal sustainability of the UN system and assisting entities to establish and meet sustainability targets. In addition to the EMG, I might also like to add that the UN High-Level Committee on Program, the HLCP, which is currently chaired by our executive director, is also discussing the development of a common approach to pollution. Similar to the one on biodiversity. So things.
Can I please ask those who are online to keep your microphones closed? Sorry, Tim, but because the effect in the room is quite comical. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
So there are various things happening at different levels, EMG, the Environment Management Group, as well as the High-Level Committee on Program. How do we achieve equal attention to all SDGs and implement this implementation in the UN development system and cooperation frameworks? It is a challenge. Won't deny that, but we are working as a UN family to achieve this by focusing on enabling and delivering integrated analyses. So not just sectoral, but try to provide this in an integrated way such that all SDGs are addressed. Mainstreaming of the environmental issues across or environmental SDGs across the social and economic pillars. For example, in ongoing work on greening economic transformation is also an entry point for cooperation frameworks to increase our knowledge of the resident coordinator teams on green economic, macroeconomic modeling, value chain approach, and green fiscal policy. In response to Norway, and what do we, if I can quote, I think it was, what do we think about the UN reform? It was a very good question and very apropos. First of all, we believe that extends the reach of the United Nations Environment Program. We are, as you know, a relatively small organization, but with a very large mandate. So if we are going to deliver the environmental agenda, we benefit from the staff on the ground of all UN agencies. Second part of that question was, do we have the capacity? And the answer is not entirely, no, but we're working on it. That's one of the reasons why we are seeking the additional resources with the Development Coordination Office in the form of joint senior advisors at the regional level. But we're also working within UNEP to create a UNEP architecture that is more efficient, effective, and responsive. This includes our UN country focal points, our regional development coordination officers in each of our regional offices, our engagement with the regional collaborative platforms and the issue-based coalitions, and our new delivery approach to have regional offices focus on country engagement and dialogue and allocating the necessary resources to make this happen. So we are working at this on two fronts. I'd also like to note that resident coordinators can also act as good ambassadors to increase our visibility and voice for UNEP by plugging UNEP into national development processes where we may not otherwise be engaged. For example, in Lao PDR, the resident coordinator facilitated UNEP's engagement in a UN government plan to develop a financing strategy for the 5-year National Development Plan, working with the Ministries of Finance and Planning, which are non-traditional partners for UNEP. And this was very helpful in terms of uptake in their national planning. Regarding the role and the capacity of regional offices to meet this increased demand, similar to the previous question, but just to note that our UN country focal points have been assigned, but these staff are also with roles elsewhere. And so we are working to boost their capacity to engage, and the regional development coordination officers are supporting the UN country team focal points that UNEP has established in the same way that regional offices have been involved with the issue-based coalitions. So all of this is quite time consuming, but we're doing our best to engage at all these various levels. On specifically how to strengthen SDG 12, as rightly mentioned, the 10-year framework of program global strategy on sustainable consumption and production was just adopted by the 10YFP board last week, which has enhanced ambition and partnerships to accelerate the shift to sustainable patterns of consumption and production. Furthermore, UNEP is enhancing its collaboration with the UN system to scale up UN support for SDG 12. For example, in discussing with the UN Development Coordination Office and the resident coordinators on their internal capacity needs for help better equipping them to deal with SDG 12. On the environmental footprint, the UN footprint is measured annually by the Sustainable United Nations Initiative, the SUN. For example, on climate, UN has committed to net zero emissions, and already in 2020, 99% of UN emissions are offset. UNEP's share of the UN Secretariat emissions overall is around 1%, which includes UN Habitat, and this is coming from the Greening the Blue report in 2021. Emissions have significantly decreased, particularly through travel reductions and efficiencies in facilities management and increased use of renewables. To accelerate the action, the UN system 2020 to 2030 strategy for environmental sustainability committed all heads of agency to align our greenhouse gas emissions reductions to the recommendations in the 2018 IPCC report. Now, how do we overcome the lack of work on biodiversity and pollution? Yes, it is true that climate change is higher on the agenda And part of this may be that the impacts of climate change are very much staring us in the face every day and with increasing frequency. Sometimes the impacts of biodiversity loss and pollution are not seen as vividly on a daily basis. But indeed, all of these three crises are intertwined. So two things we're doing to address this is working to increase data analysis, and not just the data to be able to inform the decisions, but also to provide the real analysis on the data itself. Because many country teams are telling us, thank you for the environmental data, but we're not quite sure what to do with this unless you can provide us with a little bit more assistance, because they have a lot on their plates. So we're doing our best to not only provide that analysis, but also to demonstrate the economic and financial impacts and solutions for biodiversity loss and pollution. The issue of economics, as I mentioned earlier, has been raised to us by the resident coordinators, and this is the angle we need to approach things from, in addition to the environmental and social angles as well. On the Netherlands, question on the main challenges influencing CCAs and cooperation frameworks and how they've been addressed. I've mentioned these a little bit, but one of the key challenges that UNEP involvement in the UN country team processes was not as vivid as it is these days, as it was in the earlier CCAs and cooperation frameworks. So we were often overlooked as a non-resident agency. However, signing the new UN country team focal points has addressed this, but we still continue to need support from across the organization, supporting those country teams, our focal points, excuse me, to give them the capacity they need to engage. On the question of whether we could provide a future briefing on UNEP's engagement in the UN system-wide strategies from the Netherlands, thank you. We will discuss that further internally and see how we can organize that through subcommittee meeting. On the question about the more detail on the UNEP DCO regional advisors, it is based on a pilot that we have in the Asia Pacific region that the DCO regional offices in UNEP are looking at options of including them as joint DCO and UNEP staff members that are either based in a regional DCO office or regional UNEP office. This has been recently discussed as well within the regional office of Bangkok in Asia Pacific to see how it's best working. So we are looking at this further to see how this might be best designed, although we do not have these advisors in place as yet. We are still working on this. On the question of UN partnerships and other UN entities, I mentioned a little bit about the work we're doing with UNDP. Just to elaborate a little bit further, in our joint work with UNDP, we are helping to raise the ambition of the nationally determined contributions in over 90 countries. This is joint work with UNEP and UNDP and aligning them to national action plans and the outcomes of UNFCCC COPs. We're also ensuring early country action for the emerging global biodiversity framework together, and we are demonstrating co-leadership within the UN on several issues, including intern sustainability and safeguards, mainstreaming biodiversity, and strengthening resident coordinator responses to the triple planetary crises. We also have an ongoing partnership with the Food and Agriculture Organization, including many areas such as food systems, forestry, fisheries, and the UN Decade of Restoration. Finally, we have a joint UN SDG Global Fund that has been very useful. For example, UNEP is part of a $10 million project with UNDP and UNICEF in Indonesia on sustainable finance. And it was our engagement with the UN country team that provided this opportunity for us. In addition, as I think many of you know, we have program or project level engagements with other UN agencies, such as in the UN Partnership on Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, UN RED, the Partnership for Action on Green Economy PAGE, and others. The representative of the Netherlands also asked for examples of the work of the issue-based coalition and some of the results. In Asia Pacific, UNEP has contributed to the development of all cooperation frameworks 9 cooperation frameworks to date in the related CCAs. We are influencing joint work plans on environment in 11 countries and co-chairing environment results groups in 4 countries. In West Asia, we're providing input through our work at the regional level through the development of cooperation frameworks in 2 countries, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and influencing joint work plans on environment in 5 other countries, and chairing results groups in 2 countries. In Africa, we are co-chairing environment results groups in 5 countries, working on joint work plans in 10, and cooperation frameworks in 22 countries. Latin America and the Caribbean, we're providing support to common country analysis cooperation frameworks in 8 countries, and engaged in the issue-based coalitions as well. You may wish to get some more information about the issue-based coalitions at the regional level under our next agenda item and the regional presentations. From Switzerland, the question on whether or not the system-wide response team had been established. That was one of the recommendations from the UN University from the workshop we had in May of 2021. No, the team is not formally established. This was a recommendation coming out of that meeting by the UN University. However, as I noted, we have been tasked, UNEP and UNDP, by the UN Sustainable Development Group, supported by DCO, to provide a framework for the UN system. So we are acting on that recommendation through this work. On how are we planning to respond to the low uptake of the multilateral environmental agreements and CCAs and cooperation frameworks? The UN Reform Advisory Group within UNEP is working on a preparation of a consolidated package on multilateral environmental agreements to build the capacities of UN country teams on MEAs and raise understandings of the linkages between MEAs and the SDGs. The challenge we have as well is to assert the importance of MEA implementation to the development agenda and national planning. You also asked a question about the World Environment Situation Room. We had a very successful GEO workshop here last week in Nairobi. In particular, it addressed the digital transformations and the importance of a strong GEO to support the World Environment Situation Room platform. In this regard, we've been quite pleased with the support from our grid centers in supporting the World Environment Situation Room. And the workshop I mentioned earlier this morning that we convened saw the presence of several resident coordinators in our World Environment Situation Room workshop. And their input was in fact invaluable in helping us to shape what we need to do with the WESR to make that platform more valuable to support the common country analysis. The questions from Brazil. On the SDG expenditure and the data source, the data shown in the presentation comes from the United Nations System Chief Executives Board for Coordination Financial Statistics Database, and it is the only comprehensive source of financial statistics for the organization of the UN system. The data is collected from 43 UN entities and in some instances with further disaggregation. Figures are validated by the organization's audited financial statements wherever possible. To our understanding at this point in time, but I'd have to do further work, we do not believe it includes the GEF and GCF data, but we would need to look into this a bit further. Second question you had was which regional and national priorities would be considered in increasing uptake of the Environment and Cooperation Framework. As mentioned, the CCA is the UN analysis of the country's situation, but the Cooperation Framework is a negotiated document between the government and the UN. So indeed, the national priorities are what shape the type of interventions that will be made by the collective UN system and the UN country teams. So the role of UNEP, our role through our regional offices, to make sure that we queue up the information and provide the analysis in the common country analysis, and then illustrate the importance of the environmental components to national development. But ultimately, without government agreement on the importance, other things can take priority. So our challenge, of course, is to work to make sure that the environmental issues are demonstrated and to show an impact on issues such as hunger, poverty, and equity. On the issue of the triple planetary crises vis-a-vis other crises, UNEP looks at our strategy through the environmental lens of the triple planetary crises, which does engage across all SDGs. And you can see this illustrated in our results framework, in our program of work, where we have our UNEP program of work indicators aligned with all the SDG indicators. So we are working across to work to achieve all SDGs. As was noted in the quadrennial comprehensive progress report, hunger and health and well-being are the two I mentioned that are fairly well funded vis-a-vis other SDGs. So it is indeed the areas that we need to help leverage our environmental work in the context of hunger, poverty, and equality to make a better dent in the environmental components as well. Additionally, as mentioned by the Ambassador of Algeria in her opening remarks, land degradation and desertification are also extremely important areas to be addressed and are being addressed by UNEP through our program of work and the results framework under the overall framework of the triple planetary crisis, in this case, most particularly climate change. So all of these components of the environment and social and economic agendas are very important, which is why UNEP is striving to ensure an integrated approach to the cooperation frameworks that do not silo these three pillars of sustainable development. Finally, from the intervention from the African group, I'd like to appreciate very much the substantive intervention on the importance of UN reform for all the SDGs. Once again, it is indeed, this is foremost in our discussions to reiterate the strong linkages between the UNEP program of work and the SDGs, where we have again aligned our indicators completely between the two. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carsten. Sonja?
Some questions from the Netherlands. The first one was about learning from the COVID pandemic and how it's going to influence our business continuity. There have been several lessons already related to investments in technology and the digital space, which we are already implementing so that we can work from home. Actually, with the delegated authority that we have, etc., we're actually quite effective in managing in remote circumstances. But what may be in 2.0 is that we're also looking at optimizing our workspaces. And also, we have also learned, quite frankly, about the support that is needed, that we would like to provide more support to junior professionals who are just entering the workforce. So it's a mix of elements, but we do have business continuity plans for which COVID was one update, one scenario, but there could be others. And in terms of the task forces, how do we determine and what are the benefits? Let me speak to the benefits first. Engagement in task forces, and there are two levels of task forces. Within the UN Secretariat, we are one of several entities, and therefore there are network groups, which I didn't really speak to, human resources, finance, procurement, etc., where there is ensuring alignment around policy issues and where we raise flags where we feel that our policies do not suit our business model. So there is that. But what I mentioned in the report was more about the task forces that are formed under the chief executive bodies, that is under the SGs. And in those, we find that it's very important because you have early intelligence on what can be coming up in terms of processes, system changes, maybe investments that an organization needs to be. It also allows us to influence and discuss discussions before decisions are finalized and handed down. And I want to speak to this as one of the ways we use the environmental sustainability issues. I have made at least 2 presentations to the high-level committee on management on environmental sustainability issues. And now we're broadening it to environmental sustainability considerations for procurement. So we do use it as a platform to move these agendas on. And the third is that it's a great way to get best practice information. We don't always have the best solutions for everything. And this is a good way to know what other agencies are doing and how they navigate. For instance, attracting talent, retaining talent, what we're doing on senior leadership. All these we have been influenced by being part of that group. We have prioritized our memberships in human resource related groups as one of them. And this is because the future of work discussions, which are currently going on, are really critical for UNEP as a science knowledge driven data organization to be aware of. We are about 25% millennials in our workforce. So that means we have an aging population. And it also means that people who make a career for life, which is the way it used to be, is not the way it's going. How to attract, where to attract, getting issues around, the fact that people want to move in and out of the organization. These are things we have to grapple with because it means how we pay people in the future will be different, how we act. So this is one of those that we go on, and yes, and issues like telecommuting, what people want. These are things we need to know. The second set of task force that we prioritize are around partnerships, how we manage partnerships, that we are coordinated among the UN family. So we have a very active, sometimes difficult, group on legal agreements and how we manage our legal agreements, things like intellectual property rights. How do we manage engagements with university? Who owns the studies? Who owns the publications? Very relevant for us. But then there are also new expectations from you, our member states, in terms of how we hold our implementing partners, just not ourselves, accountable. So what are the standard clauses we can agree to, whether that is on sexual exploitation, on fraud, on ethical issues. So these are things that we try to do in a harmonized manner so we give a one UN experience. And then perhaps the latest, which is work in progress, is we have joined a group on implementing partner assessments and understanding, having a database around who knows which partner, who is working on it, etc. This is tremendously useful for us as we do use implementing partners heavily in the field, but we're not present everywhere. So it helps if others can tell us what's happening. So that's number two. And the third is we have to support our countries and regional offices to navigate UN country teams and work that's going on at the country level, which is not only on the programmatic side, but there are also many, many reforms for efficiencies at the country level on the management side. So this is where our participation in the Business Innovative Group, the BIG, and the business operating strategy are really important. And we've heard the SG's call around common houses, common premises. So we help to work with our teams who may not have the experience or capacity in how to navigate. So this is basically how we have selected. The challenge is that ideas flow everywhere, and every day there's a new idea and innovation and a task force. And sometimes there are 3 meetings scheduled at the same time, and they all want senior leadership, and we may have 1, whereas other agencies may have 4 or 5. So we do have to make trade-offs about where we can attend and what, but now with technology, most of these meetings are recorded, so we can go back later and find out what we missed. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, mindful of the time, I will note that I have 4 member states on the speakers list: Malawi, Morocco, United Kingdom, and United Republic of Tanzania, all in alphabetical order. And I would hence now give the floor to Malawi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Speaking after lunch is quite a challenge. I hope I will not make you all go to sleep. My gratitude, Chair, for this opportunity to provide my directions feedback on the agenda item under discussion. From the outset, Malawi aligns itself with the statement by the African Group. My delegation is generally in support of reforming the way UN, including UNEP, carries out its mandate. As the President of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus Chakwera, said during the recent 77th UN General Assembly, the central thrust of UN reform should be to make sure that no one is left behind. In fact, we recall that there were several loud and consistent voices at UNGA 77 that the United Nations needs to do better. There was a clear call for reforms in governance, and there was a strong call for reforms in service delivery. In that regard, and allow me once again to refer to the statement by my president, and I quote, "Leave no one behind. These 4 words are the promise at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That is a principle this UN body committed to. But today, years after that commitment was made, smaller nations and younger democracies around the world already feel like this was an empty promise. Today, not only do smaller nations and younger democracies like Malawi still feel left behind, but feel much further behind than before," end of quote. Mr. Chair, I would be very happy to get a response on this clear dismay from a member state of the UN in the context of UNEP's own contribution to UN reform. Mr. Chair, as a result of our collective negligence, the global environment is now a ship on the verge of sinking, yet we continue to use evacuation methods that rush some nations out to safety while leaving the rest behind to fend for themselves in the sinking ship. Again, to refer to my president, he says, and I quote, "But if we are truly one UN family, then leaving no one behind has to be practiced, not just preached. If we are truly one UN family, we must get out of political posturing and welcome more helping hands in resolving the problems the permanent UN Security Council members have sometimes created and which they have failed to solve alone, such as the failure to stop environmental degradation," end quote. Again, Mr. Chair, I would be very interested to hear what UNEP have to say to this clear disappointment from one of its members regarding delivering in the context of the 2030 agenda. As I continue, it is said that charity begins at home. Malawi has embarked on a series of national initiatives to allow for improved environmental management by setting up the Malawi Environment Protection Authority. Such initiatives ensure environmental protection and resilience. Additionally, Malawi has aligned itself to regional and continental efforts which allow for a healthier planet. With respect to UNEP reform, it is my delegation's view that UNEP's contribution to UN reform must of necessity ensure that the role and impact of Nairobi headquarters function must not only be enhanced, but must be seen to be happening as such. Actually, for us, it is no longer about the future we want, rather than now we want. Enhancing the role of Nairobi is not something that we should be reminding everyone about all the time. It is about major environmental process taking place in Nairobi. It is about the Secretariat of the Plastics MEA having residence in Nairobi. In our view, UNEP reform is also about ensuring that outreach and engagement with regional and political groups is balanced and unbiased, and one that avoids dollar diplomacy. UNEP reforms must ensure that the relationship between UNEP and MEAs should not be vicarious and precarious. While we recognize the independence of MEAs, we are also very aware that UNEP is the leading and accepted global authority on environmental matters. As I conclude, my delegation appreciates and certainly recall with pride the CPR-led review process of UNEP's governance bodies, while applauding the process and outcome, and we will speak to it at the appropriate time, because there's an agenda item to that effect. We believe that while it is an adequate attempt at ensuring better performance, it can only be a stepping stone to enhanced reform. Allow me, therefore, to conclude, Mr. Chair, by committing that Malawi remains a partner and support for effective UNEP reform. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the representative of Malawi and give the floor to the representative of Morocco. Please, the floor is yours.
Very much. Sorry. Thank you very much, Your Excellency and Mr. Chair. And at the outset, and since it's the first time that my delegation is taking the floor, I would like, on behalf of Morocco, to thank Madam Executive Director for her very insightful opening remarks earlier this morning. And my delegation wanted as well to congratulate her for her leadership in advancing the work of UNEP and giving the necessary impulse to its reform in the context of UN general reform to better meet the environmental objectives. I would like also to express my country's alignment with the previous statements made during the general debate earlier by His Excellency Ambassador Scholl of South Sudan on behalf of the African group, as well as the statement made on this very agenda item. And my country also aligns itself with the general statement made by the distinguished delegate of Colombia on behalf of the G77 plus China. Our thanks go also to the Secretariat team for the very insightful two presentations on this agenda item, both UNEP in the context of the UN reform and 2030 agenda and the UN management reform. We appreciate the objectivity and professionalism of the Secretariat in the elaboration of the presentations, which touches upon the strengths and weaknesses in the governance or organization of work of UNEP, and which also presents options for improvements. My delegation will make a few comments on the first presentation on the UN reform, which has showcased the planned UNEP activities as a response to the triple planetary crisis and identified the existing lacunas in the UN cooperation frameworks where environment is weakly reflected, if not at all mainstreamed in country analysis, thus resulting in the absence of actions to be undertaken at the country level. This assessment reveals, in the view of my delegation, the need of reviewing the methodology of work of UNEP, where UNEP needs to be contributing in the elaboration and implementation of UN country cooperation frameworks. It needs also to improve its work at the level of regional or sub-regional offices in order to enable the latter ensure an integrated delivery of UNEP key programs and agendas on climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution at the country level. My delegation considers it crucial engaging the UN system in a stronger, more coordinated and mutually supportive environmental action in the context of the UN reform as mirrored in the medium-term strategy 2022-2025. A better engagement can be done through a deeper, fully fledged involvement of UNEP, regional, sub-regional, and country offices in the delivery of the internationally agreed actions and program of work of UNEP. Such direct and strong involvement of UNEP at the country level will address those imbalances observed in the common country analysis when it comes to first activities covered in the UN cooperation framework, For instance, and there were discussions on that earlier when it was visible to us that climate change were better addressed than biodiversity and pollution. And second, also with regard to the delivery on MEAs. And three, on the issue of the need of mainstreaming actions in economic sectors to address the triple planetary crisis. Mr. Chair, Morocco has been striving and making huge efforts to honor its international commitments when it comes to implementing MEAs that Morocco has adhered to through the elaboration of national strategies and action plans when it comes to biodiversity loss and climate change, including the integration of action plan in the economic sectors. In this regard, we believe that a strong engagement of the Regional Office of Africa, for instance, in my continent and at a country level, will help assess the major developments made in relation to the objectives of reaching SDGs linked with the environment targets and take stock of the weaknesses that countries may have in order to assist them and address those challenges. So we look forward to a strong coordination of regional offices in general and that of Africa in particular with UN country teams to improve the efficacy of the work of UNEP and its sub-programs at the country level. My delegation is welcoming the efforts made by UNEP in organizing a workshop of the World Environment Situation Room with UNEP and selected resident coordinators in order to identify data needs and criteria for integrating environment in country common analysis, and would be interested to know if all UN residents coordinators have benefited from such interaction, including ours in Morocco. My delegation would like also to request information on planned on planned activities with UN resident coordinators, if they exist, in order to achieve coordination on UNEP activities and programs at the country level. Finally, my delegation would like to seize this opportunity to also support the request by the UN country team to establish a triple planetary crisis response team, which in our view will help develop country-specific solutions. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Morocco and give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would wish to just simply echo the praise that we've heard today for the rich and comprehensive presentations under this agenda item, which have been very well reflected in the excellent quality of interventions we have heard since. Thanks indeed to Madam Deputy Executive Director and Mr. Caston. I wish to commend them and the UNEP Secretariat for articulating efforts to help strengthen the contribution of the UN development system towards increased environmental impact and in enhancing management systems. These are critically important developments towards achieving the one UN ideal and the future we want. In the context of UN reform and the 2030 agenda, it's been particularly helpful and revealing to see the issues raised in the common country analyses. We would welcome the actions suggested to enable the UN development system towards approaching UN reform alongside its work to address the triple planetary crises. Finally, I would like to suggest that concise updates be communicated periodically at CPR subcommittees to enable more targeted needs assessments and for member states to make meaningful and practical contributions to delivery of the programme of work and the medium-term strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the last speaker on my list of speakers at this moment, which is the United Republic of Tanzania. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. Since it is the first time that my delegation is taking the floor, I wish to express appreciation to the ED and the Secretariat for preparing the meeting, and to you, Chair, for the able manner with which you're leading our discussions today. On the outset, the United Republic of Tanzania aligns itself to the statement issued by South Sudan on behalf of the Africa Group on this agenda item. Further to that, my delegation would like to join previous speakers to express appreciation to the UNEP Secretariat for this informative and enriching report on the status of UNEP in the context of the UN Reform Agenda and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the UN Management Reforms. Mr. Chair, the findings on how environment matters are mainstreamed in the UN country cooperation framework are of particular interest to my delegation. My delegation commends the greater mainstreaming of environment action in key economic sectors, namely agriculture, health, energy, and manufacturing, as has been shown in the presentation. This is a step in the right direction, which, if maintained, is an assured way of achieving the SDGs timely. Notwithstanding this commendable progress, the fact that there's limited environmental mainstreaming in country program analysis and low expenditure by UN agencies on environmental SDGs at country level remains a matter of concern. Therefore, my delegation would like to bring up 2 points on this agenda. First is the role of UNEP in creating partnerships at country level. My delegation would like to know what is UNEP doing to position itself as a champion of a system-wide approach in creating partnerships to support the increased mainstreaming of environmental matters at country level. Considering the mandate that UNEP has, my delegation believes that UNEP is better placed to bring together all stakeholders, that is government, civil society, private sector, and the public at country level, to support the mainstreaming of environmental matters financially and technically, since environment matters touch each sector, institution, and people. UNEP should therefore take on this important role so as to make the UN reforms deliver on its promise. Secondly, is on the survey whose findings have been presented today. My delegation is concerned about the coverage of the survey and the report of its outcome. Recognizing that national governments also have a role to play in ensuring environmental matters are mainstreamed, for instance, in setting priorities of the UN country cooperation programs in the context of UN reforms, going forward, my delegation would like to recommend widening the survey to include more countries and to provide the outcomes of the survey at regional and country level. We believe this would allow adequate reflection, advisory, and therefore action on how to improve the situation for governments and UNEP. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, before giving the floor back to the Secretariat, if I don't have any member states, I see the Children and Youth Major Group, which has asked for the floor, which is therefore given to them. Please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Alphonse Muia from Children and Youth, taking the floor on behalf of the Children and Youth Major Group of UNEP. We are happy to have meaningfully contributed to the 5th session of the UN Environment Assembly and are excited to work towards the implementation of the 14 resolutions adopted in UNEA 5 and preparation of the 6th session of UNEA. 2022 enters in the list of landmark years in the history of environmental multilateralism for delivering a successful UNEA, UNEP at 50 and Stockholm Plus 50 international meeting, which proved that having the youth at the center of multilateral system is imperative to effective multilateralism. Looking forward to the SDGs Summit and the Summit of the Future, the Youth Constituency has already commenced a series of global consultations to effectively inform these processes. In the context of the UNEP's program of work and budget, we have the following observations to make. 1, the need to enhance youth engagement through the regional offices of UNEP and support the work of the youth at grassroots levels at UN offices. 2, facilitating meaningful inclusion of stakeholders, especially young people, and allocation of adequate resources to support their participation in decision-making processes. We hope to be sharing our inputs to specific agenda items in the coming days and looking forward to the successful annual subcommittee meeting ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now, before we move on to the next, to the final subject of the day, can I give the floor to first Sonja and then to Tim Kasten? Yeah, I can't do that. I need to change a little bit, you know. How it is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very kind of you, but I believe that I will hand over to Tim, as I think these are to him.
Tim, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Sonja. Most importantly, thank you to the representatives for these additional questions. First of all, in response to the questions and statement by Malawi, thank you, first of all, for supporting our efforts in UN reform, which we too believe are quite important. We do take the issue of leaving no one behind seriously, and we have been working to integrate that into as much work of our in our program of work as possible. I'd like to point out just a couple of things in this regard. One is that, as I mentioned, we're working to provide to promote an integrated approach to the three pillars of sustainable development. So we're not just working on environment, but trying to get environment mainstreamed such that it is impacting on economic and social components of the SDGs as well. Secondly, I'd like to point out that we have recently undertaken an evaluation of the work that UNEP has been doing on poverty, and we have recommendations now from that evaluation, which we are taking into an action plan to further our work and enhance our work. Of course, we cannot do this alone, and so UN reform and working with the UN system is quite important in this regard so that we can have a stronger, more coordinated and mutually supportive work on environmental action that does leave no one behind. So we are looking at a people-oriented approach and the social development perspective that has been integrating these three strategic pillars of our program of work, as I just mentioned. But we've also been making significant progress in bringing in a livelihood component as part of environmental sustainability. So we've had our work and our program on poverty environment action. We've had work on the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, and also the Partnership for Action on Green Economy that are all good examples that apply a poverty environment methodology and demonstrate the nexus between these two areas. This effort is going to be continued through the program of work, which will set the tone and ambition for UNEP in how we plan to address poverty reduction further and social development through our programmatic delivery. On Morocco, thank you also very much for the supportive comments and the work that we've been doing to engage and do our best with the cooperation frameworks and UN country teams. Once again, providing that integrated approach, which we are trying to achieve so that environment is not treated as a separate entity within the cooperation frameworks. Whether or not all UN resident coordinators have benefited from our work, we're certainly doing our best. As I mentioned, we have now 100 UN country team focal points in our regional offices, which is quite a significant improvement over what we had just a short while ago. The other things that we're working on here, as I mentioned as well, is we're looking at UN reform as an opportunity to extend our reach. So although we might not have someone in every single country, we are, to the best of our ability, using our regional offices and our country offices to engage with all the country teams. And where we don't have that ability, then we are engaging through our other UN country team partners at the country level. And on the task team, yes, as I mentioned, although we have not established the specialized task team that was recommended by the United Nations University, we do have the group that we're working on with UNDP and the Development Coordination Office, and we've already been conducting work across the UN system, such as the deep dive, as we called it, on the triple planetary crisis, and we continue to do other more targeted webinars with the resident coordinators. The representative of the United Kingdom, thank you very much for the positive comments on the work that we're doing. And we appreciate your interest in getting more communications regularly to the CPR on more deeply into what we're doing. And as with the request earlier from the Netherlands as well, we will work with the Secretariat of the CPR to see how we can bring those into the CPR meetings. thank you as well, the United Republic of Tanzania, for the comments and our efforts to supporting of our efforts to mainstream environment into the SDGs and the rest of the sustainable development. And you made a couple of more specific points. One was the role of UNEP in creating partnerships at country level. First of all, we are once again working with UNEP and UNDP, particular to work on partnerships at the country level. And we are also chairing, in most cases at the country level, the UN Cooperation Framework interagency groups on the environment. So we are working to create partnerships both with the UN system as well as with government to improve our work. The other example I could give you, and more specifically, is the Partnership for Action on Green Economy, which I believe is now operating in over 30 countries. And that is very much, it's a 5 UN agency partnership that is working to work with those 5 agencies and bring the full force of those 5 agencies together on green economic policies and working with the country to create greater partnerships within the country as well. Regarding the survey, we will take another look at the survey and see if we can disaggregate data to see if it might be more useful. As I mentioned, the coverage was 28 countries, and of the countries that were available to us at the time in 2020 and 2021, it was 90% of the countries that were looking at CCAs at that time. So we did have a fairly broad coverage, but we can look to see how we might be able to deepen that to see what we get at a regional or even national level. And finally, thank you to the children and youth for your information and how you're working to engage in the SDG Summit. And I failed to mention that earlier to the EU, who also asked about our plans for that. The summit, which will be in September 2023. Yes, we are looking at that. I can't tell you exactly how we're engaging just yet, but we thank the children and youth for the additional stimulus in looking at how UNEP will engage there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Casten. If nothing else from the podium here, I trust that the Secretariat has taken very detailed note of the key messages emanating from the discussion, and I certainly, listening to both of you, that is my impression, and they will also be reflected in the Chair's summary on Friday. We have now concluded our consideration of Agenda Item 3. So off we go to Agenda Item to the next agenda item 4, the implementation of the program of work and budget for 2022-23 of the United Nations Environment Programme. We do hope to go through today the reports of the regional directors from Europe, Latin America, and Caribbean and North America, to then continue with others tomorrow. Delegations will, of course, recall that the biennial program performance review report for 2020-2021 was considered at the CPR subcommittee period held on the 14th of July. Delegations will also recall that the report of the Executive Director for the period of January to March 2022 was considered at the 158th CPR meeting held on the 26th of May, and the report for the period of April to June 2022 was considered at the 159th CPR meeting held not very long ago, less than a month ago, on the 29th of September. In this regard, and to complete the picture, the discussions under this item will be based on presentations from the UNEP regional and sub-regional officers relating to their experiences of cooperation and support to member states at regional level. At this meeting, we will hear 15-minute presentations, please keep to 15 minutes, by regional officers for Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and North America, followed by a Q&A after each presentation. Tomorrow morning, we will have presentations on West Asia, Asia, and the Pacific and Africa. The presentations will be followed by 45 minutes of discussion with member states and major groups representatives. Now, before giving the floor to the regional officers, I have the great pleasure of inviting Sonja Leighton-Kone, Acting Deputy Executive Director to briefly introduce this agenda item. Sonja, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon again, colleagues. The regional offices are at the front of UNEP support to countries and lead our efforts in strengthening support to resident coordinators and the UN country teams on the triple planetary crisis and the SDGs. They play a key role to ensure that UNEP's programs meet regional and country needs. On agenda item 4 on the implementation of the program of work and budget for 2022 to 2023, we will have dedicated briefings from each of the 6 regional directors, as the chair has said. We believe that in these presentations, it gives us an opportunity to hear from them on the results achieved in each region during the first 6 months of 22, vis-a-vis the 3 interconnected strategic objectives of climate stability, living in harmony with nature, and towards a pollution-free planet. They will also highlight results achieved on cross-cutting issues such as gender, governance, the environment and social safeguards, and regional attainments on support to the implementation of MEAs. Each regional director will highlight the opportunities and risks they face, the lessons they have learned, and the consequent changes they have made, and how they perceive the way ahead. It is my expectation that the dedicated discussions you will have with each of them will allow for a more nuanced understanding and appreciation of both their unique and common challenges. With that, I say thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Executive Director, and thank you for setting the scene for the presentations which we will hear. And let me now start with Europe and Ms. Sylvie Mottard, who is the Acting Regional Director, to give her presentation, which will then be followed by a discussion with delegations. Ms. Mottard, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to start this round of presentation with a presentation of a regional office for Europe. Next slide, please. What is the Europe office doing? Basically, our work is organized around 3 main pillars. First one being obviously advocacy and representation. Second one being around partnership building and mainstreaming environment in the context of a UN reform, as mentioned earlier. And thirdly, the project implementation in order to support the implementation of a program of work in the region in response to express needs from the countries. Next slide, please. So the Europe office is covering the 50 countries all the way from Western Europe all the way to Central Asia. And among the significant regional development, I would highlight our support to the 2022 Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, as well as the adoption of a regional environmental program for sustainable development in Central Asia until 2030. Next slide, please. Obviously, the regional office is not only sitting in Geneva, but has also other location. We have an office in Almaty dealing with relationship with Central Asia country. We have an office in Brussels dealing with our relationship with the European Union. We've got an office in Moscow focusing on our relationship with Russia, and we've got an office in Vienna, also dealing with other UN entities present in Vienna, as well as hosting the Carpathian Convention Secretariat. And the UNEP Europe office hosts 2 conventions. The one of the so-called Tehran Convention on the protection of the marine environment of the Caspian, as well as the one I just mentioned, the Carpathian Convention, and the Geneva Environment Network, which will be dealt with later on. Next slide, please. Focusing on the first pillar, Sonja mentioned, climate stability, our work again is around 2 pillars, policy level work, as such as a science policy interface, the dialogue, we have the European Union on specific issue pertaining to climate change, the high-level policy engagement on climate, such as the one UNEP-UNDRR, European Parliament exchange, and also at the programmatic through the implementation of some projects funded by the Green Climate Fund, for instance. Next slide, please. Other results pertaining to climate stability can be found in the Western Balkans, for instance, where we conducted a few projects in a small set of countries, and also through the work of the Tehran Convention in terms of project support. Next slide, please. A special focus has been indeed on our work on mountains, and including applying ecosystem-based adaptation solutions to the changing environment in mountains. You see on the slide two projects more particularly, but our work in that part of a year has been really enhanced when it pertains to mountains. Next slide, please. Moving to a second pillar, which is living in harmony with nature. Here we have a lot in terms of advocacy work. We've been working together with UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center on the identification of European flagships under the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, as well as some innovative type of awareness raising through art communication and youth activities. For instance, through a postcast, which is currently being designed, and through a cooperation with Google Art and Culture. Next slide, please. Continuing with this pillar, living in harmony with nature, I have mentioned already the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. Another innovative idea we are currently working on together with some of the regional seas in the region would be to share experience of those 5C in terms of restoration of ecosystems of marine environment. Obviously, our role is also as a management of the office to liaise with the member states in the region for the promotion of the UN Decade, but more largely biodiversity topics, which have been particularly prominent in this first part of the year. And finally, another focus under that pillar is looking at ecological connectivity and nature-based solutions in the pan-European region, the region being highly diversified and ecosystems being highly interdependent. Next slide, please. We obviously work for the review of a post-20 global diversity framework. We also supporting countries for the natural state of environment reporting and assessments when it comes to biodiversity. And the new work stream we are increasingly focusing on are the food system work streams. So we have organized our work with preliminary consultations internal to the organization. And now we have indeed stepped in the issue-based coalition for the Europe region on food system, hoping to contribute to the environment mainstreaming of in the food system work stream. Next slide, please. Finally, under that pillar, one obvious and very important track of work is linked with health issues. So within the One Health initiative, obviously, but also in terms of programmatic activity through GEF projects on biodiversity in the Western Balkans. So once again, on one hand, advocacy and political work, and on the other, programmatic type of work. Let's move to the pollution planner. Next slide, please. Again, the same shape we have on one hand, some political engagement, especially with the EU, which has been very dense in this first part of the year, and together with some programmatic and project activities, such as in the Western Balkans, on the waste management report in the Western Balkans, and a training on the, let's say, digitalization system for waste collection and monitoring. Next slide, please. When it comes to pollution in the region, air pollution is a clear focus of work. We are far from achieving, let's say, the necessary targets in terms of human health. We are working together, obviously, with other UN agencies and other entities through the IBC task team on air pollution. We are also working within other type of cooperation with the UNHCR Convention. We are also working on some assessments of air pollution in some countries with quite a successful outcome. Next slide, please. Finally, I'm getting to the cross-cutting issues, work on the judicial, where we brought together senior judges. We are also working through, obviously, the 2022 Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. And we have engaged over 300 participants and in several peer learning sessions on SDGs 4, 14, and 15 in particular. Next slide, please. Among work pertaining to cross-cutting issues, we have developed interacting country features, which would help to understand the environmental status of identified countries. This is a work we are doing together with European Union delegations. And also, as per usual practice, we are contributing to the environmental performance reviews under the auspices of the UN Economic Commission for Europe. Next slide, please. Obviously, that has been mentioned at length. We are contributing to a UN reform, and we stepped up this contribution to a UN reform through our work with the issue-based coalitions. We are co-chairing the Environment and Climate Change issue-based coalition in the region. And in that context, we have drafted different tools and mechanism for the use by the resident coordinators. I also mentioned that we recently stepped in the food system issue-based coalitions, and we are expecting to deliver some trainings also pertaining to green, or to continue the work on green economy. Next slide, please. I will go rather quickly on the next two slides. It's our contribution on the finance and economic transformation, special focus on sustainable public procurement in a set of countries in the region. National waste management programs and plans have been also provided. And we also have trained civil servants from a wide range of ministries on economic policy analysis in terms of shift to green economy. Next slide, please. The same way, we have developed some quite a few green economy reports and assessments for the use of the countries which have expressed that needs. And we also have a green economy course which was translated in Russian to be able for a wider use in various audiences. Next slide, please. We are obviously supporting the implementation of multilateral environmental agreements in the region, such as through our Geneva Environment Network, which have been holding many briefings to inform the diplomatic people in Geneva on major global negotiation processes, such as the plastic, but also in preparation of, for instance, the COP27 and the CBD COP, the CITES, Basel, Stockholm, etc., etc. Next slide, please. I will end with some opportunities and challenges we are facing. Opportunities are obviously to work more with other stakeholders beyond, of course, the UN and I would say the traditional partners, but enhance our work on youth, working more with NGOs. We have a very recent outcome of the Environment for Europe process, which had his ministerial meeting in Cyprus last month, where two areas of focus were agreed to look at was tourism and infrastructure. So looking ahead, that would be two areas we would like very much to foster cooperation on. Next slide, please. I would think that from our view, the main risk at the moment is the risk that the global and regional shocks continue to pose challenges in terms of prioritization of resources for environmental interventions. Another risk we are seeing is probably the risk to have unsustainable agricultural practices coming back into the region. Next slide, please. So the lessons learned is that we are able, through working in the context of a UN reform, to meaningfully influence the development of countries in the region. We are convinced that by focusing more on high impact interventions, we have more visible but also more useful interventions which really correspond to the country expressed needs. And then I would say as well that we need to get feedback from those interventions. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, I have mentioned air quality as a focus area, as it remains a very serious concern in the region. Looking ahead is indeed what I mentioned on food system at the national, international levels in Europe, and also to broaden our audience and how to make our message across not environmental partners, and the continuation of the work on the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. That's all for me. Thank you. I hope I remain in the 15 minutes time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would then open the floor for discussion on this point. Do I see anybody? European Union. I'll start with the European Union, please.
Thank you very much. Exactly. If we had a presentation on the European region, allow me to start with my comments. Of course, I will start with the thanks to presentation, which gave really a good overview of activities in the region. And thanks a lot, of course, for all the work that went into preparing this presentation. We do appreciate that it's been very succinct and which illustrates what activities we have carried out in the European region. And I think especially we were really pleased to see that UNEP is addressing all kinds of emerging issues. For example, that you now take up more work on food systems, which is indeed very relevant. Of course, we would have liked to have maybe a bit more analysis of how successfully were these initiatives implemented, because so far we had overview of them, but it would be very interesting to know whether they resulted in some actual concrete outcomes and how they contributed to improving situation in all these countries. Of course, it would be interesting to hear as well of which activities are especially working well in European regions, which are the priorities, and what could be improved in terms of implementing, better implementing the program of work in the European region. So for the next step, maybe a bit more of analysis of how successful is the implementation. We would be appreciative of that. And now I'll just continue with a bit more general comments, which I think will apply to across all the other presentations we will hear later on. We think that engagement of UNEP through regional offices is essential for implementation of the Agenda 2030 and for achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. This engagement is crucial for ensuring environmental sustainability is referred in national policies, and it's crucial that this engagement helps us to address and reflect environmental issues and governance issues in the rule of law and human rights at the country level. The efforts of UNEP to be closer to the countries using network of regional, sub-regional and country project offices should be supported by all member states. This would contribute to strengthening integration and development of synergies, bringing multiple efforts, multiple benefits and cost effectiveness at regional and country level, which will lead to a successful implementation of the program of work and MTS. Equally important, this engagement at regional and country level can also assist with funding mobilization from international countries and private resources, and especially would help to balance the funding coming not from a single region, but from all of them. And maybe finally, for future consideration of how to best work on the program performance review, we know that the report actually for the program of work for 2020 and 21 was delivered earlier this year, and it was briefly discussed at one of the CPR meetings. But this is the moment where we do discuss the implementation of program work in detail. And so the question is, of course, how do we put those two things together? If the report comes earlier and we have a discussion and deep dive in the annual subcommittee. So that shows to us that the cycle of work and reporting cycle does not always fit very well with timing of the annual subcommittee and our discussions and oversight function, and therefore would welcome and actually invite Secretariat to maybe hold a discussion at some point to see how can we better align the timing of the program performance review or annual subcommittee with the reporting cycle of UNEP. And I think that discussion would be very, very useful for future alignment. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Czechia, please. You have the floor.
Mr. Chair, while adding my voice to those who thank the Secretariat for organizing of this meeting, I would like to share with you our engagement in implementing UNEP and MEA's resolutions and decisions in the region of Europe. The Czech Republic has been active, particularly in the Caucasus region, at both bilateral and multilateral levels. A number of projects have been implemented in the area, contributing to UNEP's work on biodiversity and pollution. Let me mention a few of them. In Georgia, projects within the framework of the Sustainable Development Program of the Aragvi Protected Landscape Area and its communities are being implemented in cooperation with the Austrian Development Agency. They are ensuring sustainable management of the Aragvi Protected Landscape Area. Second, sustainable development of communities in Aragvi. And third, forest inventory and implementation of sustainable forestry for the Aragvi Protected Area. The program will contribute through a series of multi-sectoral measures to the protection of mountain ecosystems and sustainable management in this mountain area. The program runs from 2018 until the end of 2023. In Armenia, the twinning project strengthening biodiversity conservation in Armenia and its sustainable use with European standards is ongoing. The project is managed by Nature Conservation Agency of the Czech Republic in cooperation with the Finnish Environment Institute and the Armenian Ministry of Environment. The aim is to prepare proposals for legislative changes in biodiversity conservation in Armenia using EU legislation in this area. In the area of chemicals and waste and pollution, the project Rehabilitation of the former oil refinery site in Batumi is being implemented in Georgia. The project is scheduled to run until the end of August 2023, and its objective is to contribute to the reduction of environmental and population threats in the area of the former oil refinery in the port of Batumi. Another project called Capacity Building in the field of sound management of chemicals has been implemented also in Georgia, until the end of this month. It focuses on preparation of legislative framework and strengthening of the implementation and control capacity of Georgian institutions, which will create the preconditions for future systemic solutions for sound management of chemicals at the international standard level in accordance with EU regulations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of Czechia and now give the floor. I have two more speakers here at this moment on the list, Malawi and Switzerland. I give the floor to Malawi, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Maybe as a preliminary, my delegation had prepared an intervention as a general response. So we'll be very happy to be guided by you as at what point we can make that, either at the end when all the regional officers have presented or whenever, Mr. Chair, your guidance will lead us. But having said that, on the presentation on the Regional Office for Africa, for Europe, thank you so much for sharing that information, and we do appreciate. Perhaps this question, my delegation is going to ask all the regional officers, so maybe also with your guidance, Chair, whether we have to repeat this question or if the regional directors that are around can be kind enough to take note of the question, that when their time comes, they can answer it. We note that most of the interventions by UNEP are project-based, and as such, they are coordinated by the divisions. And yet here is the regional offices reporting about implementation. So my delegation would be interested to hear what is your experience in working with the directorates or the divisions, and what sort of synergies are there? Are there points of disparities and conflicts between the divisions and the regional office? So this question cuts across all the presentations. But the one specifically for Europe, we noticed that your regional office straddles two UN regional groups, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, if I'm not mistaken, and would be very happy to hear whether such a reality has an effect on your strategic and operational effectiveness. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. To reply to your question, I recommend leaving general questions to the end after everybody has, after we have gone through all the regional offices. But of course, specific questions which you may have for individual regional directors, please feel free to ask them when they come. And I'm not sure if everybody will be online at the same time. So as one says, where I come from, repetition is the mother of all learning. So I suppose that you will have to ask and re-ask, ask in certain cases. Now, when I was noting that I didn't have many people on the list, whoops, I did suddenly. So now I have Switzerland, the Netherlands, the Russian Federation, and the United States of America. Anybody else? No, not at this moment. So Switzerland, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much to Sylvie for the excellent presentation and also for providing us with an insight on all the important work that has been done in a also a challenging period. We also noted with appreciation the fact that it was mentioned the role of the Geneva Environmental Network also in improving synergies between UNEP and MEAs and also with the broader international community. We stand ready to continue working with the GEN and the regional office to see how we can further strengthen this. We also very much welcome the work that has also been noted with regard to human rights and also the support that was done by the regional office and other people in UNEP in the context of the right to a healthy environment and the follow-up that will continue in the context of the Human Rights Council. I would have two specific questions. I noted that when it was mentioned on the slide on opportunities, that one of the issue mentioned is the promotion of the digitalization agenda, and we would be interested in knowing a bit more on this. And then on the point on looking ahead, it was mentioned that one of the challenges that continues to face the region is also concerning air quality and air pollution. And there was also a cooperation with UNECE mentioned. We would also be interested to know what are the cooperation and what is planned also with the WHO, and how we could also strengthen the pollution work in general, but also how we can support this in Geneva. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the representative of the Netherlands, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, let me align with what has been said by the European Union, but in fact, I would like to share quite a few of the questions that were raised by Malawi, for example, and Switzerland as well. So that reduces my list. I will not repeat them. Our delegation understands that maybe at this point in time, it has been a bit early to analyze the results of the implementation of the program of work so far. And we do appreciate the choice that is made to provide an overview of implementation activities at a regional level. However, like a colleague from the European Union had expressed, it would have been, I think, useful for this meeting if a bit more analysis would have been made in looking at what had been, what were the results or the intermediate results, and what have been what has been learned from the activities so far. We also believe that this is a moment that the Secretariat can use, in fact, to not only provide us an explanation or an overview of what they are doing, but also provide recommendations to us to help you implement. And so I would like to and that is follow up the question that was posed by our colleague from Malawi. If you would be able to make a recommendation that would allow you to make more impact in your activities versus the results that you had envisaged in the context of the medium-term strategy, what would be your recommendation to this body be, including on how your cooperation with the, let's say, headquarters divisions, how that cooperation can be strengthened for you to deliver at a regional level? With regard to the next steps or looking forward, we note with pleasure that based on one of the lessons learned is the need to focus on impact. And I think that is something that is quite central in the medium term strategy. Noting that you envisage to focus on air quality and food systems. We were wondering what is the basis for that, and how these priorities have been discussed with the countries in your research. So basically, what is the criteria and the underpinning of focusing on impact in that region? Following your guidance, Mr. Chair, I will come back with similar questions for the other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, we would like to thank the UNEP Office for Europe for the report. there were a few references to the Tehran Convention on Protection of Marine Environment of the Caspian Sea. UNEP's Office for Europe hosts interim secretariat for the convention. In the very beginning of the establishment of the convention, it was very active in promoting the process. Unfortunately, since COP5, which was held in Ashgabat in 2014, not much work was done to promote the work in this important region. For 8 years, there were no sessions of the Conference of the Parties. Last one, sixth one, was held in Baku only in October this year. It means between previous one and this one, there were 8 years time lapse. And that's such a time lapse cannot ensure implementation of the convention. We would like to have more information what Secretariat is planning to do to revive work for implementation of the Tehran Convention. So far, we have to state that performance of the interim secretariat was not efficient enough for the last 8 years. Thank you.
Thank you. United States.
Thank you, Chair. Since this is the first time the United States is taking the floor, we would like to convey our thanks to the Secretariat for its work in preparing for this meeting. Thank you as well for the presentation from the regional office in Europe. We welcome UNEP's recent initial report on the environmental destruction resulting from Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, included in slide 22. This is an important first step in assessing the damage and planning for post-conflict capacity building assistance. The United States aligns itself with the statement delivered this morning by the United Kingdom on the environmental destruction caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There is a point made earlier that needs to be corrected. The Russian Federation continues to insist that discussing its invasion and war against Ukraine is outside the mandate of UNEP and politicizes its work. This inaccurate statement, often repeated, is a misrepresentation that needs to be corrected. UNEP has a mandate to focus on the environment, which is transboundary in nature. Its work includes environmental matters specific to disasters and conflicts. In fact, it has done previous research and analysis on assessing the environmental impacts of conflicts in Iraq, the Western Balkans, and elsewhere. On the other hand, politicization is the unprecedented step of opposing a regional group's candidate in Nairobi for political reasons. The Russian government's war of aggression against Ukraine is taking a heavy toll on the people and the environment, and it must end. We are concerned about the loss of human life and the damage Russia is doing to Ukraine's environment, the consequences of which will resonate in the immediate and longer term for the Ukrainian people, its neighbors, and the planet. We are witnessing widespread damage to critical infrastructure and key ecosystems and the services they provide, including native forests and wildlife, civilian nuclear facilities, drinking water and wastewater systems, and chemical plants. This poses significant risks to the public and increases air, soil, and water pollution, harms biodiversity, and elevates emissions levels that accelerate climate change. The crisis in Ukraine continues to negatively impact food security worldwide, including from the loss of Ukraine's vitally important seed bank in the Kharkiv region that held germplasm not found elsewhere. Russia's deliberate targeting and planned destruction of Ukraine's native forests, national parks, Ramsar wetland sites, watersheds, and ecosystem services is the definition of politicizing the environment in the most abhorrent ways. Delegations have the right to discuss the damage to the environment resulting from Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine because it has led to higher levels of pollution and emissions, increased global food and energy prices, and significant loss of biodiversity. As officials from environment and foreign ministries focused on environmental protection, isn't it our responsibility in the 21st century to speak up when the environment is targeted as a weapon of war? Russia's specious arguments to the contrary demonstrate a complete lack of understanding of the environmental mission of UNEP and its own deliberate actions harming the environment. The United States remains committed to working with Ukraine and like-minded members within the UN family to raise awareness of the broader impacts of the environmental destruction and ways to address these challenges. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I now see no more requests for the floor at this moment, so I shall give the floor back to Ms. Matart. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On the more general questions asked by Malawi, Switzerland, and the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken, on basically how we deliver on the program of work in full collaboration with substantive divisions, it is obvious that our project always depends from the overall agreed framework for the implementation of a program of work. So projects I have mentioned during my presentation are not sitting in silo, but belong to the overall project framework of the organization. I hope it reflects, it answers the questions. We are entering the new delivery model, as you all know, and this is the way we are indeed currently implementing projects per the agreement of respective substantive divisions. The second point I noted from Malawi, but I think I failed to understand exactly the question, whether our geographic diversity in the pan-European region is affecting our operational effectiveness. I don't really understand the content of the question, but in terms of, let's say, the operations of the Europe office itself, I can reassure that it is not impacting our effectiveness when it comes to our activities, either pertaining to policy dialogue or program implementation across the region. I have noted the point on air pollution, asking maybe for specific example of what we are doing. For instance, I mentioned that upon the request of a UN country team in Serbia, specific request, we contributed to the task team on air pollution and delivered an interagency webinar on air pollution from domestic heating, which in turn was integrated in national policies. On our relationship with WHO, and answering the question from Switzerland, we are strongly engaged through the One Health initiative. We are engaged with WHO Europe, and we are a key player in the Europe environment and health process. We are also beyond partnership on the One Health. We are also engaged with UN Economic Commission for Europe, for instance, on other topics such as infrastructure, tourism, and education. I did not mention at length education for sustainable development in the pan-European region, but that's another important pillar of our work. Coming to the comment of the Russian Federation about the Caspian Convention and the lack of meetings since 2014. Unfortunately, we had the meeting last week in Baku, which ended in an inconclusive manner. And our team is looking at options which could be presented to the contracting parties. But as you well know, one contracting party has opposed very firmly to arrangement pertaining to the permanent secretariat of the Tehran Convention. So we would be coming back to you as UNEP with option paper. I note the intervention of the United States on the report, the preliminary report on Ukraine. And I would like to share that the report, preliminary report, will be discussed in the context of a briefing to the CPR subcommittee planned on 13 December with an overview of UNEP's engagement in disasters and conflict work. And it will be discussed during that moment. I think I had a question on digitalization as well. This is a rather new pillar of work in the office, with also the nomination of one regional coordinator for North America and Europe working on digitalization. The intent of the work in the European region is to focus on legislative processes which facilitate indeed implementation of digitalization processes and integration of digitalization in policy making. I hope I have answered, if not all the question, most of the question.
Thank you very much. Before giving the floor to the Russian Federation, Radhika, you had an additional point to clarify.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to the comment by the European Union on the better alignment of the consideration of the performance reporting, I wanted to remind delegations that the issue is for discussion at the annual subcommittee on Thursday morning under agenda item 8A, when the committee is to discuss the CPR review process recommendation contained in paragraph 14C, in which the Secretariat is requested to explore options to rationalize and streamline mandated reporting requirements to future UNEA meetings by consolidating such reports into shorter and/or fewer reports that summarize general progress of implementation and refer more detailed information to the online tools. A background document has been made available by the Secretariat with recommendation for consideration of Member States. We will indeed welcome the views of Member States on the recommendations that are contained in this background paper, and we look forward to the discussion on Thursday morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And now give the floor to the Russian Federation, followed by Malawi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll have a short reply in regard to what was said by the delegation of the United States. First of all, we have to state that intervention of the United States delegation on Ukraine has nothing to do with today's meeting agenda, and that goes against rules of procedure. And US is the last country to make such accusations. This country is accountable for more than a dozen armed conflicts and aggressions against many countries around the globe. Among them, Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and many others. Millions of human lives were lost during these conflicts, and the great environmental damage caused to these countries. Why we never discussed these conflicts in UNEP before? Because there was a Nairobi spirit. But as soon as Russia stood up to protect Russians being oppressed in Ukraine by the Kiev regime, Nairobi spirit is immediately forgotten. First of all, I have a recommendation to the United States. They need to stop supply of arms to Ukraine. With these arms, Kiev regime kills civilians and destroys the environment of the liberated territories. It means United States make their best to prolong this conflict and to cause greater damage to the environment of Ukraine. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Malawi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate for allowing my delegation to come back. We've endeavored to write a question in the chat for purposes of the region office for Europe. I hope they can read it. Maybe it's shorter and clearer in our intention. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There was a question in chat which was mentioned by Malawi. If in the chat function, if Ms. Motard wants to take it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can reassure Malawi that this is not affecting our operational effectiveness indeed. I would like also nevertheless to point that the fact that we have two regional groups, West and East European group, means that we also have to address transboundary and connectivity issues. And that could be maybe where we might have some difficulties, but I can reassure you that on the ground, this does not affect our operational effectiveness.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Motat. If there are no more requests for the floor, and realizing that the clock is again doing what it usually does, tick forward, I would now then suggest, I'm looking at my colleagues here, no, nothing. I would just then thank everybody for a rich discussion. Thanks, Ms. Motat, for having participated online and joined us. And we would now move to Latin America and the Caribbean, and I would invite Acting Regional Director, Mr. Juan Bello, to deliver his presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished representatives, good afternoon. It is my great honor to address you all in my first week as the Acting Regional Director and to present you the progress of the Latin American and the Caribbean Office in the implementation of the program of work during this period. I hope I'm audible. So, I'm seeing the slides, so perfect. So if we move to the next slide, while we are getting there, I would like to mention that the Latin American and the Caribbean Office covers 33 countries with sub-regional offices in Kingston for the Caribbean and Montevideo for the Southern Cone, country offices in Mexico and Brazil, and project offices in Colombia, Haiti, and Paraguay. This office concentrates on enhancing capacities for effective response to the most urgent environmental challenges present in the region, and also in supporting coordination and strengthening partnerships to promote the achievement of regional environmental goals. Next, please. Among the various important events held in the region during this first semester of this year, we wish to highlight first the special session to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Forum of Ministers of Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean, hosted by Costa Rica in January. This session provided an opportunity to discuss regional strategies on a range of issues, including the progressive closure of dump sites, the finance mechanisms for climate action and forest protection, the advancements of circularity and air quality monitoring, among others. Second, between 7 and 9 March, it was held also in Costa Rica, the fifth meeting of the Forum of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean on sustainable development. At this meeting, ministers and high-level officials underscored the need to urgently increase ambition for climate action, urged the adoption of an ambitious, realistic, and effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and recall the need to renew and enhance efforts for the sound management of chemicals and waste. We would also like to make a reference to the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Escazú Agreement, which took place in Santiago, Chile last April. In this first COP, the countries of the region reaffirmed the treaty as a driving force for sustainable development and a crucial governance tool for the development of better public policies in the region. Next, please. So moving to the Regional Office Work Plan, with regards to the strategic objective of climate stability, the Office is focusing on 5 key results. In terms of adaptation, the work plan seeks to enhance national and local adaptation planning processes and actions, including piloting and upscaling nature-based solutions for adaptation in urban and rural areas. It seeks to implement mitigation actions by supporting the adoption of clean technologies at the regional and national levels. It develops strategies to enhance capacity at the regional and national levels to meet the requirements of the Transparency Framework and the Paris Agreement and their climate ambition. And it also aims at strengthening capacities for the integration of low-emission and climate-resilient strategies within the financial system. Next, please. In the context of the Green Climate Fund readiness, 5 countries have received technical support for the development of their national adaptation plans, delivering on one of the goals of the Paris Agreement. Likewise, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, and Guatemala have received technical support to increase clarity, transparency, and understanding of their indices in terms of legal framework, private sector engagement, and financial instruments. We can report that 6 countries, Uruguay, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama, have strengthened their technical and technological capacities to enhance and track the implementation of their NDCs and long-term strategies. Next, please. Finally, in terms of aligning financial flows with the Paris Agreement and green recovery criteria, all countries in the region can now track their COVID-19 recovery investments and policy alignment with Paris goals through the online recovery tracker. Prospective policies have been modeled in 5 countries, Panama, Honduras, Argentina, Costa Rica, and Grenada, to determine economical, social, and climate benefits to inform decision-making processes. Next, please. Now, in terms of living in harmony with nature, our work focuses on, first of all, supporting the implementation of the UN Decade on Ecosystems Restoration and the Regional Action Plan, enhancing an integrated landscape and seascape management in the LAC region, strengthening the capacities of national authorities to implement the 2030 Agenda and the Biodiversity Conventions through the development of a regional cooperation program on biodiversity, helping also to bring biodiversity perspectives in those initiatives related to food system sustainability and food security, and strengthening regional capacities to be better prepared to natural hazards while integrating environment into humanitarian response. Next, please. During this period, and with the approval of the Forum of Ministers of Environment, a technical unit for the implementation of the action plan for the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration has been established. We are also delighted to inform that Jamaica joined the Caribbean Biological Corridor, and 2 project proposals have been formulated for additional resource mobilization on this initiative. During this period, we also saw the launch of the regional flagship for the Dry Corridor in Mesoamerica in collaboration with FAO and regional partners. And finally, as part of the UNEP-OCHA Joint Environment Emergencies Unit, we supported the response on Peru's oil spill, which took place in January, and we supported the mission that was sent to strengthen the government efforts to tackle the situation. Next, please. With regards towards a pollution-free planet, our work plan has established the following priorities. First, strengthening capacities and promoting policy and regulatory frameworks in the region to address the sound management of chemicals and waste. Second, improving waste management, including through circular approaches and eradication of inappropriate disposal. Third, reducing releases of pollutants, particularly marine plastic pollution. And fourth, strengthening regional and national capacities to improve air quality. Next, please. In this context, the office finalized the regional report on financial and technical mechanisms to address marine litter and microplastics. And we also supported the action plan on marine litter for the Northeast Pacific region, which was finalized and launched on 8th of June as part of the UN World Oceans Day celebration. Also, the Regional Action Plan on Air Quality was adopted by the region's Intergovernmental Network on Atmospheric Pollution. This action plan establishes a cooperation framework to support the strengthening of integrated air quality. And finally, as part of the coalition of Latin American and the Caribbean for the progressive closure of dump sites, a baseline report and roadmap for the province of Santa Fe in Argentina were completed. Next, please. So as part of the enabling activities in the area of finance and economic transformation, the regional office has focused on empowering regional actors to accelerate a shift towards sustainable consumption and production, as well as green, blue, and circular economy. It also promoted the integration of environmental sustainability strategies at the heart of the COVID-19 economic recovery plans, and helped strengthening the technical capacities for youth to adopt sustainable lifestyles and more sustainable consumption patterns. Next, please. So continuing with finance and economic transformation, and through the Partnership for Action on Green Economy, PAGE, the regional office supported Guyana with a green economy modeling study, and by building individual institutional capacities, integrating the domains of expertise of the various PAGE partners. Furthermore, in Uruguay, PAGE supported the design of the country's new 10-year comprehensive plan, inclusive of environmental, economic, and social aspects, and the implementation of the Integrated Waste Management Law. Guatemala was supported in developing a public expenditure classification guide and a guide to access green and climate finance. Finally, a national green jobs promotion strategy and a diagnostic on country indicators for green jobs were developed in support of Argentina. Next, please. In the area of environmental governance, the regional office has supported the strengthening of the Forum of Ministers of Environment as the highest regional environmental decision-making body in the region to deliver on the environmental dimension of the 2030 Agenda. It has also supported countries across the region in identifying integrated approaches to the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, as well as to advance environmental law and governance. With regards to the science policy interface, the regional office has been working on the multidimensional strengthening and development of capacities to produce high-quality, policy-relevant environmental data and information. In particular, the office is supporting systematic reporting on the state of the environment and its trends, as well as enhancing climate information services and early warning systems. Next, please. The office has continued the collaboration with regional parliaments and relevant regional networks, as well as on issues related to environmental defenders with the Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean, and with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We are also delighted to report that the Regional Environmental Information Network has been now formalized as a scientific advisory body to the Regional Forum of Ministers of Environment. The regional office has been also very actively involved in the formulation of 7 UN cooperation frameworks for sustainable development, and has provided technical assistance to UN country teams through the regional peer support group of the Development Cooperation Office. Finally, UNEP co-chaired the issue-based coalition on climate change and resilience with 17 UN agencies and the UNFCCC Secretariat for the region. Next, please. Moving over to cross-cutting issues, specifically gender and environment, guidelines were developed to support countries in their efforts to mainstream gender in national environmental policies and strategies. The period also saw mapping of strategies of strategic stakeholders in the region developed, and the formulation of a multi-country initiative on humans' role in water harvesting as an adaptation action. The first in-person retreat of the Gender and Environment Expert Group of the LAC Forum of Ministers took place with the adoption of an annual work plan, including training, capacity building, South-South cooperation, and knowledge management activities. Next, please. The office has also promoted South-South cooperation across the region and on a number of topics. Of particular relevance are the activities undertaken in the context of the GEF Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, which facilitated sharing of knowledge, lessons learned, and experiences among Peru, Costa Rica, Chile, Argentina, Panama, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominican Republic, Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, and Honduras. This initiative has also helped to reinforce climate information by reaching indigenous groups in compliance with the transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. Next, please. With regards to the support to the implementation of multilateral environmental agreements in the region, it is worth highlighting that during the special session of the Forum of Ministers held in Costa Rica in January this year, the executive secretaries of the Rio Conventions and the BRIS Conventions were invited to discuss with ministers on how to enhance synergies across the region. UNEP also provided support for the preparatory meeting for the face-to-face segment of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, COPs, held in May in Montevideo, and the regional office, jointly with UNDP and the World Bank, assisted the Secretariat of the Climate Convention in the organization of the Climate Week for Latin America and the Caribbean. Finally, at the request of the countries in the region, the office prepared a discussion paper on climate finance and loss and damage to facilitate finding common positions ahead of COP27 of the Climate Convention. Next one, please. In terms of opportunities, excellencies, member states in the region recognize the Forum of Ministers of Environment as a solid platform for high-level political dialogue to identify environmental priorities, common approaches, and joint initiatives to address pressing regional environmental challenges. Now, the challenges in relation to climate risk, vulnerability, and the widespread urgency to enhance access to new and additional climate finance presents a good opportunity to promote further regional cohesion ahead of COP27. Next, please. However, it is important to mention that the global food and energy crisis, next to high levels of public debt after the pandemic, pose a huge burden for the sustainable development of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. In some cases, creating pressures on environmental policies already adopted or envisioned in the region. Next, please. The regional team recognizes that implementation of the United Nations Development System reforms creates new opportunities for coordinated and synergic action on the environment, but also create challenges, particularly regarding expectations and responsiveness to country-level priorities and processes. On the other hand, we also recognize that the various regional intergovernmental networks and working groups of the Forum of Ministers effectively serve as key mechanisms to promote and amplify environmental action, in particular by facilitating South-South cooperation, coordination, and data sharing to inform decision-making. Next, please. Indeed, in this context, the improved dialogue with governments and partners in the region has enabled the definition of a shared vision on key regional priorities, leading to regional action plans, such as, for instance, the ones on ecosystems restoration, on the reduction of atmospheric pollution, or the one to address sound management of chemicals and waste. An interesting area of work in the region is the one concerning emergency preparedness, which led to the adoption of a regional action plan on environmental emergencies. These are just few examples of the richness of activities and initiatives emerging from the implementation of the program of work of UNEP in the region. Next, please. Looking ahead, I would like to refer that last week, the Bureau of the Forum of Ministers met under the auspices of the Costa Rican presidency in a very productive session which allowed members of the Bureau and observers to assess progress in the implementation of the regional work plan and to exchange perspectives in preparation for the climate and biodiversity COPs, and also towards the first meeting of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee for a Plastics Treaty. Also, a special session has just been held to discuss the implementation of the decision for small island development states in Trinidad and Tobago. Last but not least, we are delighted to mention that several regional initiatives are being discussed to support action on transboundary ecosystems under threat. Next, please. With this, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, I conclude my presentation. I think it's next one, please. In closing, I would like to mention that the regional team is changing gears and already taking actions to fast-track the implementation of the new delivery model for a more effective and coordinated UNEP in the face of the triple planetary crisis. We look forward to continuing to receive your guidance and feedback to make it a success. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bello. I have two actually pre-booked interventions on the for the floor. The first one coming from Barbados and the second one from Costa Rica. So Barbados, you have the floor. Yeah, please, colleague.
Thank you, Chair. Chair of the CPR and Permanent Representative and Ambassador for Finland, Madam Deputy or Acting Deputy Executive Director, Sonia Layton-Cohn. Thank you. As through you, Chair, first, let me on behalf of Barbados sincerely thank the Executive Director for a warm welcome to us as the first SIDS to be represented locally at this meeting ever. And since this is my first contribution, let me also thank you for the work that the Secretariat has done to make this meeting come off in the way that it has, the documentation and so on. So we thank you. Chair, at the outset, I wish to thank Mr. Juan Bello for his detailed presentation on the ROLAC program implementation for the period January to June 2022. Barbados welcomes the level of activities highlighted in the regional director's presentation and sincerely appreciates the effort by the Secretariat to simplify the region's result in the context of a complex medium-term framework of UNEP. Barbados would, however, welcome a deep analysis of three key areas in the future reports. First, on the program finance targets for the Latin America Caribbean region. Second, the level of resources mobilized. And third, the sources of financing for projects and activities undertaken in the region. Barbados also requests an addendum to the current report, specifically regarding activities carried out in the Caribbean SIDS sub-region. Mindful of the capacity constraints that exist in the Latin America and Caribbean, and particularly for Caribbean SIDS, Barbados must underscore the need for urgent scaled-up implementation of medium-term work program in the Caribbean SIDS sub-region. To this end, we are enthusiastically prepared to work with UNEP headquarters, ROLAC, and other stakeholders to create cooperation platforms geared towards supporting resilience building in the Caribbean SIDS. This position, Mr. Chair, reiterates a call made by Her Excellency Prime Minister Mia Moore-Motley at the opening of the 22nd Forum of Ministers of Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean in Barbados last year. While Barbados notes the elaboration of the Caribbean SIDS Program 2, based on Decision 8 of the 22nd Forum of Ministers of Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean, we, however, note that progress has been slow, and we call for scaled-up support of the program's full elaboration ahead of the 23rd Forum, tentatively scheduled for the fourth quarter of 2023. In welcoming the presentations of results here today, Barbados would also welcome a deeper reflection by the Secretariat in highlighting the challenges encountered in the implementation of the work program, and importantly, to hear recommendations on how members of GRULAC in Nairobi could support the efforts of the Latin America Office, Latin American Caribbean Office. Members of GRULAC would recall that this was a special call by Prime Minister Motley at the 22nd Forum of Ministers, and it remains a priority for Barbados going into the next year's forum. Finally, Barbados is pleased to see the operationalization of other outcomes of the 22nd forum, including on gender and environment, science policy interface, pollution and waste management, the progressive closure of dump sites, and on environmental emergencies. Moving forward, in future presentations to this subcommittee, Barbados would also wish to see a focus placed on impact and outcome analysis based on the monitoring and evaluation of results under the regional work plan. Chair, as it relates to financing, we call on the Assembly to take note of the Bridgetown Initiative as articulated by Her Excellency Mayor Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, which inter alia calls for a massive global assault on the climate crisis. More on this will follow. Chair, I'm obliged to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. Good evening, colleagues and excellencies. I would also like to thank Mr. Juan Bello for his excellent presentation. Costa Rica gladly announces that the Regional Office of UNEP is working hand in hand with the Ministry of Environment of Costa Rica on a long list of priorities for the country, such as the National Planning for Adaptation to Climate Change, including identification of investments for nature-based adaptation, the development of public policy and investments for the promotion of electric mobility, the analysis of the economic, employment, and climate benefits of the implementation of the National Decarbonization Plan, the definition of standards, public policy, and financial mechanisms for energy efficiency in products and equipment, the establishment of a national transparency system for compliance with the Paris Agreement, the evaluation of antimicrobial resistance in the region and in the country, and alliances with commercial banks to identify climatic risks in the banking portfolio. Also, as you are aware, Costa Rica currently holds the presidency of the Forum of Ministers of Latin America and the Caribbean, so it has a fundamental role in the articulation of regional dialogues. The last special session of the forum in commemoration of its 40th anniversary took place in January in San Jose, where the ministers reflected on the impact of this forum and the environmental situation in the region, identifying, among others, the importance of promoting financial innovation in environmental matters to respond to the triple planetary crisis in view of the enormous challenges within the fiscal situation that the region faces, to promote common regional initiatives and generate political consensus, for example, in the Caribbean, the Amazon, Mesoamerican forest, Andes, and others, to transform natural wealth into economic and social benefits, in addition to seeking common positions and strengthen the voice of the region at a global level. They launched the new alliances with the Ministries of Finance, Planning, Majors, and others that serve to accelerate the action and centrality of the environment ministers in response to the triple planetary crisis. Just this past week, under the leadership of Costa Rica's Minister of Environment, Mr. Tatterbach, the country held the meeting of the Bureau of the Forum of the Ministers, and they agreed on the work roadmap for 2023 and reapproachment of regional positions on relevant issues such as combating climate change, relevant issues about the COP27, the International Negotiating Committee on Plastics, and COP15 on the Convention of Biological Diversity. In addition, Costa Rica proposed the creation of a regional ocean commission with the support of the members of the Bureau. Regarding the program to improve air quality, Costa Rica welcomes the work of UNEP and reiterates its commitment to becoming a country with zero emissions by 2050. In this regard, the Ministry of Environment, through a monitoring network in alliance with the National University of Costa Rica, seeks to maintain the measurements of different contaminants of air quality to have data and information that can be useful for the subsequent development of strategies and policies at the national level. Finally, Costa Rica welcomes the gender parity status information within the UNEP Secretariat and MEA's personnel. However, regarding the overall regional representation of staff, we call for a better geographical representation of the Latin American and Caribbean group. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, the representative of Costa Rica. I now give the floor to Colombia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We wish to thank the Secretariat for this detailed report on the implementation of the program of work in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. We note with satisfaction the alignment between the areas of work and key results of the regional office work plan and the response needed for the main challenges that the region faces, including an increased vulnerability to the effects of climate change, the accelerated loss of biodiversity, and the effects of pollution, in particular plastic pollution, in the marine environment. Just last week, our authorities met in Costa Rica for the meeting of the Bureau of the Forum of Ministers of Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean and touched upon these same subjects and the upcoming high-level meetings to deal with them. The first session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on a legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, COP27 of the UNFCCC in Sharm el-Sheikh, and COP15 of the CBD. We welcome the leadership of Mr. Bello and look forward to maintaining the level of work, engagement, and ambition in our interactions with the Secretariat and the rest of member states in the Latin American and Caribbean region, including at the Forum of Ministers and its Bureau, the Working Group on Decision 8 related to Caribbean seats, and the Cartagena Convention. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have now on the list of speakers the Netherlands and then the indigenous peoples and their communities major group. And I recall that we have still one regional office to go through today. So the Netherlands, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It might be no surprise that I will come back as announced. I would like to start by thanking the Secretariat to provide this overview of the activities implemented in the Latin American and Caribbean region. And as I had said in previous interventions, we understand that at this point in time, it might not be easy to have tangible results to make an assessment of to what extent the program is on track. We would echo, however, the interventions made by the European Union in general, but also, as we heard from our colleague from Barbados, that it might be worthwhile to approach the reports to this meeting with a bit more analysis on or against the results that you want to achieve in the program of work. Also, we see this meeting as an opportunity for us to provide guidance to the Secretariat to help UNEP to enhance their impact in the implementation and achieve the results going forward. So let me rephrase a little bit the question that I had posed earlier. Could you indicate what is based on the experience to date with the new MTS and program of work? What can help you or what is necessary to enhance impact of your activities and to deliver the concrete results that you want to achieve in this program of work period? And to what extent, for example, the divisions can assist you, but also the scientific products such as GEO, the World Environmental Situation Room, and other relevant products that UNEP provides for you to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, the representative of the Netherlands. I now then give the floor to the last group on my list of speakers at this moment, which is the Indigenous Peoples and Their Communities Major Group. Yes.
Thank you very much. I am here coming under Major Women's Group, but I work with local community groups in Antigua and Barbuda. And I could not come here and not say something after I heard the report from UN ECLAC, because the support they have provided to us as local community groups with the implementation of the Escazú agreement has been exemplary. It has reached the stage where the Escazú agreement is like a household name in Antigua, so that when the government messes up, you hear the people on the radio saying, you ratify the Escazú agreement. The Escazú agreement brings power. It empowers the people. And it has given us a lot of bold advocacy, things we would not have done before. But now with the ratification and the implementation, you know, it has brought like a sense of relief. It's like a burden gone. And we are able to really exercise environmental governance. We have a say in decision making. You know, we are pushing for inclusive and participatory processes. Any development coming to the island, we insist that there must be consultation. And I see the transformational effect taking place in the people's lives. You can hear it, you can feel it. It's like a different breed of people. So I just wanted to say thank you to UN ECLAC and the Escazú Secretariat for the support that they have provided. And we are going to continue to implement the articles. We are building good relationships now, partnerships with other islands, with St. Lucia, with Dominica, with Grenada. We are working together to ensure that people now have a say in the development processes. It took 29 years for the Escazú Agreement to come into force. 29 years. And what if it had happened before? Would things have been the same? But now that it has come into force, we are determined to make it work for the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And on that very uplifting note, I am glad to give the floor back to Mr. Bayo to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to the representatives from Barbados, Costa Rica, Colombia, Netherlands, and the major groups for their comments and reactions to the presentation. I would like to first address some of the points made by the representative from Barbados, particularly with regards to the increased support to the activities for the Caribbean region, and in particularly to the small island developing states. We are fully committed to accelerate the implementation of Decision 8 of the 22nd Forum of Ministers of Environment on precisely the small island development states and all the elements that are contained in the Bridgetown Declaration. On that note, we have already advanced the work on expanding the funding mechanisms for the Caribbean, especially, for instance, in the context of the Euroclima initiative, which now covers also the Caribbean region, in by which UNEP is acting as the implementing agency. We have also mobilizing funding through the readiness programs of the Green Climate Fund, and we truly hope that we will be able to do the same for the GEF 8. With regards to the comments made by the comments and questions made by Netherlands, first of all, with regards to what is needed in the region to increase our impact and our capacity to deliver. Certainly the most important, and this may sound a little bit obvious, but is to scale up the amount of funding that is needed for implementation of all what is being agreed and identified in the region. We have done very good progress in terms of policy alignment, in terms of policy development, but now we need to focus on financial instruments and implementation, and that's going to be one of the greatest challenges for the next period. We are also working more and more in terms of enhancing the science policy interface, using, of course, the World Environmental Situation Room, using the geo assessments. We have various national assessments, state of environment reports that are that have been developed during this period and that are under development for the next coming months. And this is a very important instrument to facilitate the regional dialogue and cooperation and overall action, which is the most important. With regards to I'm just checking my notes. Just wanted to mention with regards to the very important intervention by the representative from the major group with regards to the Escazú agreement, that we are working very closely with the Economic Commission on this, and that also we are enhancing our mechanisms in the region to promote access to environmental justice, access to information, and access to participation. These are top priorities also in the context of the Forum of Ministers of Environment, in which we already have consultations with civil society, but we want to make sure that this is more coherent and comprehensive. These are just a few initial reactions to this, and as I said, we really thank for the guidance and comments that have been received. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And before we move to the next subject, Malawi.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. As I had indicated, that I have one question which I would like to ask all the regional directors, and I don't know whether it was tackled because I seem to have gone outside. No, I was outside. So the question is, again, noting that most of the interventions by UNEP are project-based, as delivered by the various thematic divisions of UNEP, we would like to hear from the regional office of Latin America and the Caribbean on their experience, the relationship between the regional office and the 7 UNEP divisions in terms of planning, implementation, and reporting on the program of work and budget. And Mr. Chair, this will become the standard question. So again, I hope the other regional directors have taken note of it so that I don't have to repeat it. And I also give a chance to other delegations to take the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bello.
Apologies, Mr. Chair. And thank you so much to the representative of Malawi for reminding us about this very important question. We are working very closely with divisions and all the offices in the organization, even more now in this moment of the implementation of the new delivery model. What we are doing is basically to not only to enhance communication and coordination, but also, more importantly, working together in the identification of the most strategic responses to ensure impact. So we are now even going some steps back in terms of thinking, aligning, ensuring coherence, ensuring coordination. And this is all facilitated by the new delivery model. And we truly, as regional office, we welcome this approach. And we are delighted that this is basically helping us to amplify our regional capacities with those capacities that are across the organization. This is our perspective from the Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Of course, this implies adjustments, and we don't deny that aspect, but we see all this as a set of opportunities that hopefully will help us to give us more capacity in the end for our delivery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With this, I thank Mr. Bayo for having joined us, and we move from the south a little bit more to the north to the last sort of dish of the day, which is North America, and the presentation by the regional director, Ms. Barbara Henry. I will ask already at this moment, as I know that you have been online, if you could maybe, while you do your presentation, sort of at the end of it, also answer Malawi's question so that it would not need to be repeated, and then we open the floor after that. Thank you very much. Ms. Henry, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and greetings, Your Excellencies. I will certainly endeavor to do that for the question from Malawi. So first slide, please. So the North America Regional Office, we cover the United States and Canada from our base here in Washington, D.C. We are the smallest regional office in UNEP. We have only 6 professional staff and 3 general service staff. We're also a bit unique in that we are the only regional office that does not implement projects. We also don't have a UN country team here. The bulk of our work is really to be the UNEP liaison point with our 2 member states and to engage other regional stakeholders on UNEP's global agenda. This includes, for example, working with regional actors on implementation of UNEA resolutions. At the same time, we do manage a small number of initiatives on priority issues in our region, which I'll touch upon shortly. With regard to significant developments in our region, the headline is really the amount of legislative and executive action from our 2 member states in recent months. In the US, we have seen 3 very significant pieces of legislation passed that include major new investments in climate and the environment, namely the Infrastructure Bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS Act. And if you take these legislative investments together, if they are fully implemented, they should really put the US on a path to achieve the 50 to 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions set out by President Biden last year. Although it's outside the time frame of this period, I do want to just take the opportunity to acknowledge the very recent ratification by the US of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. In Canada, Prime Minister Trudeau announced the 2030 emissions reduction plan in March for achieving 40 to 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And this is part of the commitment by Canada to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, which was actually passed into Canadian law last year. And more recently in June, the government also passed a ban on many types of single-use plastic, which is part of the Canadian goal to achieve zero plastic waste by 2030. So as you can see, we have a very strong policy enabling environment in our region at this time. Just to say a word about collaboration across the 2 countries, there is of course quite a lot, but I do want to note the creation of the Canada-US Working Group on Supply Chains. This group was created in part in recognition of both countries' ambitious climate goals, but also the historically massive value of trade between them, over $1 trillion a year. So among other things, the group considers how this trading relationship through its sheer size can help stimulate global markets for the supply of zero emission technologies such as electric vehicles and solar power. Next slide, please. In terms of what the North America office itself is doing, starting with climate, There are three main things. First, we promote North American engagement in global initiatives like the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which Canada has until recently co-chaired and the US is now co-chairing, or the International Methane Emissions Observatory, which the US is supporting. We do this through partnership with the relevant bureaus of federal government, but at times we also reach out to state and provincial-led governments. Last year, for example, we partnered with the National Caucus for Environmental Legislators to arrange a briefing for state lawmakers in the United States on methane emissions with our team at headquarters. Second, we work to increase awareness of key findings from major UNEP publications, such as the Annual Emissions Gap Report and Adaptation Gap Report, and the UNEP-led Global Methane Assessment. We disseminate these reports to governments and non-government stakeholders, but we also push out key messages through our social media and campaign work, and through partnerships with groups who connect to specific public constituencies. So, for example, we partner with the NGO Reverb, which specializes in greening rock concerts and helps us get our messages out to young people through popular music and musicians. Finally, we're engaging with the environmental justice agenda, which is a priority for both our member states. We do this through partnerships with NGOs such as the Solutions Project, which connects frontline community leaders to national and global policy processes. These leaders, as part of these processes, are then able to highlight the disproportional impacts of climate change and pollution on poor communities, Indigenous peoples, and communities of color, and also share practical solutions. They also constitute a really important new voice for greater action on climate in the national discourse. Next slide, please. Moving on to nature action, we're gearing up our activity in support of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. We are reaching out to identify key partners in our region for the decade, including from the private sector and the philanthropic sector, and also publicizing the agenda with the public at large. So, for example, we have extended our very popular Restoration Road Trip social media campaign for another year. This campaign travels virtually across North America to highlight restoration initiatives. And if I can throw out a bit of a commercial announcement here, if you go to our website, you can see our interactive map, which tells stories of restoration work across wetlands, forests, deserts, and seas in this region. The other important platform that we manage under this heading is the North America Marine Protected Areas Network, or NAMPAN, as it's called. This is a virtual community of practice for marine protected area managers across the US, Canada, and Mexico. We established NAMPAN at the specific request of these three governments, and with the support of our Regional Commission for Environmental Cooperation. The aim is to strengthen the conservation of biodiversity in critical marine habitats across the region, and NAMPAN does this by connecting marine protected area managers to share information and good practice. We also support these managers through the network to take a series of what we call deep dives into specific region-wide challenges like climate change and ecological connectivity. And we help manage the NAMPAN website. Another commercial, if you go there, you will see our new interactive story map of marine protected areas throughout North America. Next slide, please. So our work on pollution is currently focused on two regional priorities, air quality and plastic pollution. On air quality, we launched a regional consultation last year as part of the work on UNEA Resolution 3/8. And in February this year, in time for UNEA 5.2, we published the resulting report, Actions on Air Quality in North America. On September 7th, we convened regional stakeholders in observance of the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies, together with the World Resources Institute and the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. And we certainly anticipate that air pollution will continue to be a significant focus for our office for the foreseeable future. On plastic pollution, and specifically the follow-up to UNEA Resolution 5/14, we're helping maintain a good flow of information and connection between our member states and the work of the INC Secretariat. And here I would just like to acknowledge the $7 million provided to UNEP by the US in support of the INC process, as well as the Canadian offer to host a future INC meeting. And I definitely also want to appreciate the leadership that both the US and Canada brought to the table during the negotiations on Resolution 514. Closer to home, our office is a central partner in an initiative to address plastic pollution along the Mississippi River. We work with a network of over 100 mayors of cities and towns along the river, as well as National Geographic and the University of Georgia, to coordinate the Mississippi River Plastic Pollution Initiative. The way this works is that mayors mobilize their communities to come out for a day and act as citizen scientists in a specific area along the river, using a free mobile phone app to take pictures of the plastic waste they find. Ultimately, the aim is to create a plastic pollution map, which can be used by policymakers as a baseline for action. And for this year's data collection, we are very grateful to the US Environmental Protection Agency for their support in enabling us to apply an environmental justice approach and collect data in several underserved communities in the Mississippi Delta. Next slide, please. In terms of opportunities and risks, I've already highlighted the leadership from the US and Canadian governments on climate and the environment, which has created a very positive enabling policy environment in our region. But I just want to add to that we have a real opportunity to enlist the energy and support of some new constituencies here, including the frontline communities I have mentioned. The organized advocacy of these communities on the triple planetary crisis can generate some important political breathing space for policymakers to take action. On the other hand, we see one of the risks in this region being that the political breathing space for strong action on the triple planetary crisis is very fragile. And the consequence is that it's actually very difficult to achieve consensus, including, for example, in Congress, on support to multilateral institutions to address global goods like a healthy environment. But we're working on that together with our colleagues in Environment and Climate Change Canada and the US State Department, including providing greater visibility for our work in Ottawa and on Capitol Hill. And I just want to throw out one more regional risk here, which is not reflected in the slide, but is very real for us now. And that is the increasing frequency and severity of climate-related extreme weather events. Two major hurricanes, Fiona and Ian, recently struck the US and Canada with massive damage to people, property, and infrastructure, and we know this will only get worse. Next slide, please. In terms of lessons, I think it's fair to say we have learned to pivot our way of working in this region, depending on the policy environment at any given time. And we've learned how to engage new partners whose influence and resources can be mobilized going forward, such as the private sector, the philanthropic sector, youth, and frontline communities. In terms of changes made in our office, we refreshed our office strategy last year. The new strategy guides us in how we work as a regional office based on what we call the 4 C's. That is, collecting information and intelligence about regional priorities to share with our headquarter colleagues, connecting those colleagues with important actors in the region, both within and outside government, convening diverse regional stakeholders where appropriate to share ideas or catalyze action, and communicating key messages to stakeholders and the public at large on what we need to do to address the triple planetary crisis. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, we definitely want to build up and build out our strategic partnership work in this region with a number of key sectors. First, we have a revitalized and very active regional ministerial forum now in the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. We have already identified specific areas of closer collaboration with the CEC, including marine protected areas, and also engaging the private sector to promote more nature-positive business models. Second, our region is home to some of the world's biggest digital and tech companies. We plan to ramp up our work in engaging with these and other digital actors here as part of UNEP's new digital transformation program. Third, we're a region that is rich in scientific and technical institutions. We want to boost interaction with these institutions in support of UNEP's environmental assessment work, including for peer review, data for the World Environment Situation Room, and input to GEO reports, among other things. And finally, we do have a region with a large number of the world's major philanthropic organizations, many of whom work internationally. Yet we lack the architecture for structured, strategic engagement with leaders in this sector to ensure that we're all pulling in the same direction. And we do hope to address that in the very near future. So that's the end of my presentation. Perhaps I can just address the question from Malawi, which I hope has been illustrated in the presentation. We work hand in glove with our headquarter divisions. And in fact, we are, if you like, the amplification in our region for the work of those divisions. Without them, we would not in any way be able to progress our agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have two pre-booked seats on the speakers list, and I'll start from north going to south, Canada followed by the United States. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My delegation would first like to thank the UNEP Secretariat for the organization of this meeting and the significant material prepared. And I would like to also express appreciation for the presentations we've heard from the regional directors so far, and in particular, Barbara Henry that we just heard. We very much appreciate the relevant projects, all the collaboration that emanate from the North American office, be it on air quality, circular economy, plastics, food waste, and more, as Mrs. Henry has elaborated on. We are quite thrilled about the new North American Marine Protected Areas Network, for which the office has been a catalyzer and an enabler with the North American Commission on Environmental Cooperation. Speaking of the collaboration with the Commission, we note that they're also planning a large North American project on the circular economy, and we are very much encouraging the UNEP North American office to engage, something to look forward to. And last but not least, it is our understanding that Barbara Henry will leave her position in the coming months. So on behalf of the Canadian government and including Environment and Climate Change Canada, I would like to pay tribute to her leadership and outstanding contribution to the work of UNEP in the region. Barbara, thank you for your dynamism and vision, and we really appreciate the great collaboration we have had with you and Fatou and your team over the last few years, and we wish you well. And we also look forward to continuing the cooperation with the office and our neighbor to the south. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would give the floor to the United States, please.
Thank you, Chair. The United States is grateful for the presentation by the Regional Office for North America and for the great work that Barbara Henry and her team have done. The North America office has raised the visibility of UNEP's work with important audiences in the United States, including at all levels of government. Since we met at UNEA 5.2, the United States has taken critical steps forward to meet our broader environmental and climate goals. As Barbara mentioned, President Biden signed 3 historic pieces of legislation into law this year that combined will invest more than $1 trillion to improve U.S. infrastructure, to reduce emissions, and to invest in science and technology through education and research and development. The bipartisan infrastructure law is rebuilding roads and bridges, replacing lead pipes to provide clean water, expanding high-speed internet across the country, developing a nationwide network of electric vehicle charging stations, and delivering cheaper and cleaner energy to households and businesses. The historic Inflation Reduction Act sets up the United States to cut GHG emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. We are hopeful that it will prompt other major economies to strengthen and implement ambitious 2030 emissions reduction targets to keep within reach a goal of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The CHIPS and Science Act, among its other objectives, will drive increased investment in research and development in clean technologies and promote education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields that help create new solutions to build a sustainable future. I am proud to highlight that on September 21st, the United States Senate gave its advice and consent to ratify the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. The United States will soon join the European Union and 136 other countries to show its commitment to reduce global warming. UNEP's North America office has helped support and boost visibility on key priorities important to the United States, including in the context of UNEA resolutions. For example, we greatly appreciated the office's role in facilitating consultation with both government and non-governmental stakeholders in the United States and Canada on air quality work, in preparation for the report on actions on air quality in North America, published in February this year in fulfillment of UNEA Resolution 3.8. We also appreciated the North America office's support with the organization of a U.S.-convened event on the margins of UNEA 5.2 focused on regional responses to the air pollution crises. Air pollution is a key concern for the United States, and we believe that a step change of global effort is within our reach. We are now in conversations with the North America office and with colleagues at UNEP headquarters to see how we can make this happen going forward. In February, we also had the historic agreement on Resolution 514 to launch an intergovernmental negotiating process for a new global agreement to end plastic pollution. The North America office facilitated an introductory meeting with the new INC Secretariat and is reaching out to non-governmental stakeholders, including the private sector, in the region to encourage active engagement. At Stockholm Plus 50, the Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, Environment, and Science announced that the United States is providing a $7 million grant to UNEP to initiate a new project to improve and increase capacity building for countries to tackle the critical challenge of reducing plastic pollution. We are finalizing the details with the Secretariat to start this project very soon. In line with our priorities, we also appreciate the North America's office efforts on plastic pollution with a bipartisan coalition of mayors of cities and towns along the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River Plastic Pollution Initiative, in collaboration with the University of Georgia, National Geographic, and supported by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, has enabled local communities to document plastic along the river, to create the first ever plastic pollution map of the Mississippi and a baseline against which policymakers can gauge the impact of their actions to tackle this problem. Recently, during the Smart Cities Expo in Miami, Florida, the State Department met with a dozen U.S. mayors to discuss how cities can help tackle the plastic pollution challenge. The issues identified by U.S. mayors are very similar to challenges faced by mayors in many other parts of the world. As such, in April 2023, the Secretary of State, along with the Mayor of Denver, Colorado, will host mayors and local officials from across the Western Hemisphere for the first City Summit of the Americas. At that summit, the State Department will launch its new Cities Forward initiative to create a community of practice around sustainable, inclusive, and resilient cities, including a focus on reducing plastic pollution. The North America office has also supported our important domestic environmental justice agenda, a priority for the Biden administration. through collaboration with NGOs and policymakers to highlight how the disproportionate impacts of climate change and pollution affect poorer, underserved, and underrepresented communities the most, and to share practical solutions. On the climate agenda, we appreciate the role of the North America Office in increasing both the general public and policymaker awareness of key findings from important UNEP-led publications, such as the Global Methane Assessment and the Annual Emissions Gap Report. We also appreciate the office's liaison role regarding important UNEP-linked climate initiatives, such as the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and the International Methane Emissions Observatory. For Nature Action, among other things, we want to thank the North America Office for acting as Secretariat for the North America Marine Protected Area Network, which supports the protection of our precious marine environments by connecting marine protected area managers and experts across Canada, Mexico, and the United States. In the United States, marine protection is managed at the federal level through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and I know that our colleagues at NOAA have greatly valued having UNEP provide a regional platform for leveraging their efforts, especially on issues such as climate change and ecological connectivity across our common marine ecosystems. We are also excited by the visibility that the North America Office is giving to restoring important ecosystems in the United States through its innovative outreach initiative known as the Restoration Road Trip, which highlights local restoration and protection efforts across North America. This is part of the office's work on the wider UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. Finally, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our Regional Office Director, Barbara Henry, for her service. In a relatively short period of time and under difficult circumstances, Barbara brought energy, creativity, and collegiality to the office's work. We join our neighbors to thank Barbara for